She told the millionaire, "I saved myself for you," and his pride collapsed before he touched her skin. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew that saying good morning to him would be different today, but she did it anyway. Eleanor Parker adjusted the stack of contracts in her arms as the elevator climbed to the 42nd floor of the Manhattan Investment Tower. Through the glass walls, the city stretched endlessly beneath the gray October sky, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the memory of last night's words that had escaped her lips like a prayer she never meant to speak aloud. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors slid open to reveal the pristine reception area of Hale & Associates. Elena's heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that matched her accelerated heartbeat. 26 years old, and she had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable than she did walking toward the mahogany doors of Dominic Hale's corner office. "Morning, Elena." Cassidy, the receptionist, looked up from her computer with a knowing smile. "He's been asking for you since 7:30. Elena's stomach tightened. Of course he had been. After what she had confessed, after the way she had laid her soul bare in that dimly lit conference room while rain drummed against the windows, she knew there would be no going back to the comfortable distance they had maintained for the past 2 years. She paused outside his door, her hand hovering over the polished brass handle. Inside, she could hear his voice, low, authoritative, probably on a call with Tokyo or London. Dominic Hale, 36 years old, worth more than most small countries, and the only man who had ever made her believe in the kind of love that poets wrote about and dreamers chased. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, remembering how it had started. 2 years ago, she had been just another face in the sea of qualified candidates, interviewing for the position of personal assistant to one of New York's most ruthless investment moguls. Fresh out of college, student loans suffocating her dreams, living in a studio apartment in Queens that she could barely afford. But something had happened during that interview. When Dominic Hale looked at her, really looked at her, with those steel-grey eyes that seemed to see straight through every wall she had ever built, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Not attraction, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. "Miss Parker." His voice had been crisp, professional. "Why should I hire you when I have 50 other candidates with more experience?" Eleanor had straightened in her chair, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Because they want this job for what you can give them, Mr. Hale. I want it for what I can give you." He had hired her that same afternoon. Now, 24 months later, Eleanor knew every detail of his life that mattered. She knew he took his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar cube. She knew he worked until midnight not because he loved money, but because silence made him think too much. She knew the scar on his left hand came from defending his younger sister when he was 12. She knew he had built his empire not from greed, but from a desperate need to never feel powerless again. And last night, in a moment of exhaustion and raw honesty, she had told him the one truth she had never shared with another living soul. Elena took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in." She pushed open the door to find Dominic standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the city skyline. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like it was crafted by angels, and his dark hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour. But Elena could see the tension in the set of his jaw, the way his hands were clasped behind his back a little too tightly. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He turned, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. Those grey eyes that had haunted her dreams were studying her face with an intensity that made her feel like she was standing naked in a spotlight. "Elena." Her name on his lips sounded different now, softer, more careful. "We need to talk." The contracts in her arms suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She set them down on the marble conference table, buying herself a moment to steady her racing heart. "About last night," she began. "You can't take it back." His voice cut through her words like a blade through silk. Elena lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. After 2 years of perfect professionalism, after a lifetime of keeping her deepest secrets locked away, there was no point in pretending anymore. "I don't want to take it back," she whispered. And in that moment, watching Dominic Hale's carefully constructed mask crack just slightly around the edges, Elena realized that some truths, once spoken, have the power to change everything. Have you ever kept a part of yourself so sacred that sharing it could either destroy you or set you completely free? The silence between them lasted exactly 17 seconds. Elena had counted every single one. Dominic moved away from the window, his footsteps muffled by the Persian rug that probably cost more than her annual salary. She watched him settle behind his desk, those steel-grey eyes never leaving her face, and Elena felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no way back. "Sit down." It wasn't a request. Elena lowered herself into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where she had sat every morning for 2 years, discussing schedules and contracts and the mundane details that kept his empire running smoothly. But nothing about this morning felt mundane. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. In the morning light streaming through the windows, Elena could see the faint lines around his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights and the weight of decisions that could make or break fortunes. "Tell me what you meant," he said quietly. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Hale, Dominic." The correction came swift and firm. "After what you told me last night, I think we're past formalities." She had never called him by his first name before. Even in her most private thoughts, he had always been Mr. Hale, distant, untouchable, safe behind the barrier of professional courtesy. But now, looking at him across the polished expanse of his desk, Eleanor realized that safety had been an illusion. Dominic. His name felt foreign on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. "I meant exactly what I said." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. Outside, the sounds of Manhattan morning rush hour filtered through the glass. Car horns, sirens, the distant rumble of the subway carrying thousands of people to jobs that probably didn't require them to bare their souls before 9 a.m. "Do you know what you're asking of me?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Eleanor tilted her head, confused. "I'm not asking anything of you." "Aren't you?" Dominic stood abruptly, moving to the bar cart in the corner of his office. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey despite the early hour, then seemed to think better of it, and set the glass down untouched. "Elena, in 2 years, you've never missed a day of work. You've never been late. You've never asked for a favor or special treatment. You've been—" He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair. "Professional," Elena finished for him. "Perfect." The word hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. "And now you're telling me that you—" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "That I saved myself for you. Yes." "Jesus, Elena." Dominic turned away, bracing his hands against the window. "Do you have any idea what that does to a man like me?" "What kind of man are you, Dominic?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The kind who destroys everything he touches. The kind who built his fortune on other people's failures. The kind who visits Mrs. Caldwell in 4B every Sunday because she reminds you of your grandmother," Elena interrupted softly. "The kind who anonymously pays for the scholarship program at PS 163 in Brooklyn. The kind who worked 3 jobs to put his sister through medical school." Dominic spun around to face her, his eyes wide with shock. "How do you—" "I know you, Dominic Hale. Not the version you show the world, but the real you. The man who leaves his office door open when I'm working late because you know I feel safer that way. The man who remembers that I take my tea with honey when I'm stressed. The man who pretended not to notice when I cried at my desk the day my student loan payment was late." Elena stood, her legs unsteady but her voice growing stronger with each word. "You think you're dangerous. You think you destroy everything you touch. Then explain why I've never felt more protected, more valued, more seen than I do when I'm with you." The distance between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Elena could see the war playing out behind Dominic's eyes, desire battling with self-preservation, hope wrestling with fear. "Elena," he said her name like a prayer, like a warning. "You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly." She took a step closer, close enough to smell his cologne, cedar and bergamot, and something indefinably masculine. "I'm 26 years old, Dominic. I've had opportunities. I've had men who were interested, who were safe, who would have given me exactly what society says I should want." Another step closer. "And I said no to every single one of them. Do you want to know why?" Dominic's jaw clenched, his hands fisting at his sides. "Why?" Elena reached up and straightened his tie with fingers that trembled only slightly, her knuckles brushing against the solid warmth of his chest. "Because none of them were you." For a moment, Elena thought he might close the remaining distance between them. She could see it in his eyes the moment when his legendary self-control wavered, but then his phone buzzed on the desk, shattering the spell. Dominic stepped back as if she had burned him, reaching for his phone with hands that weren't quite steady. "It's Whitmore Industries," he said, his voice rough. "I have to take this." Elena nodded, understanding that the moment, whatever it had been, was over. She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "Eleanor," she turned back, her hand on the door handle. "This conversation, it's not finished." The promise in his words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the dangerous territory they were entering. "I know," she whispered, and stepped out into the hallway, leaving Dominic alone with his phone call and the echo of her confession hanging in the air like smoke. Elena couldn't focus on a single document for the rest of the morning. She sat at her desk in the outer office, staring at quarterly reports that might as well have been written in ancient Greek, while the memory of Dominic's voice saying, "This conversation, it's not finished," played on repeat in her mind. Through the glass partition, she could see him moving around his office, pacing like a caged panther during his phone calls. At 11:47 a.m., Dominic's door opened. "Miss Parker." His voice was carefully neutral, but Elena caught the slight emphasis on her formal title, a deliberate step back from the intimacy they had shared 2 hours earlier. "I need you to reschedule my lunch with the Thornfield group. Something's come up." Elena looked up from her computer, studying his face for any sign of the vulnerability she had glimpsed that morning. But Dominic Hale, master of self-control, had rebuilt his walls with expert precision. "Of course. Should I suggest alternative dates? Next week, Thursday or Friday?" He paused, his fingers drumming against the doorframe. "And cancel my 3 p.m. with Davidson. I'll be leaving early today." Elena blinked in surprise. In 2 years, Dominic had never left the office before 7 p.m. "Is everything all right?" For just a moment, his mask slipped. "I need some air." Before Elena could respond, he retreated into his office and closed the door with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. An hour later, Elena was organizing contract files when her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Bianca. "Coffee later? You sounded weird when you left this morning. Did something happen with Mr. Tall, dark, and emotionally unavailable?" Elena smiled despite herself. Bianca Rodriguez had been her friend since college, the only person who knew about Elena's carefully guarded feelings for her boss. Well, the only person who had known, until last night when Elena had finally found the courage to tell the man himself. "Rain check. Work stuff. Girl, you've been saying work stuff for 2 years. When are you going to admit you're in love with him?" Elena's fingers hovered over her phone screen. How could she explain that she had already admitted it, that she had laid her heart bare and was now waiting to see if it would be handled with care or shattered completely? "It's complicated. The best things always are." Elena was about to type a response when movement in the hallway caught her attention. Dominic was walking toward the elevators, his coat slung over his arm, moving with the determined stride of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. He paused at her desk, and Elena felt her breath catch. "I'll be unreachable for the rest of the day," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "If Thornfield calls about rescheduling, tell them I'll contact them personally tomorrow." "Dominic." His name slipped out before Elena could stop it, soft and questioning. He finally looked at her then, and Elena saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "Elena, He stopped, shaking his head. "We'll talk tomorrow." "Will we?" The question escaped before Elena could censor herself. "Or will you spend tonight building walls so high that tomorrow you'll pretend this morning never happened?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Elena stood, moving around her desk to face him properly. They were alone in the outer office, but she kept her voice low anyway. "You asked me what I meant. I told you. I told you things I've never told another soul, and now you're running." "I'm not running." But even as he said it, Dominic took a step toward the elevators. "Then what are you doing?" He stopped, his hand clenched around his coat. When he turned back to her, Eleanor saw something desperate in his eyes. "I'm trying to figure out how to be the man you think I am." The admission hit Elena like a physical blow. She had expected denial, maybe anger, but this raw honesty was more than she had dared hope for. "Dominic," she whispered, taking a step closer, "you already are that man. You've always been that man. The only person who doesn't see it is you." For a moment, they stood frozen in the space between her desk and the elevators, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air like smoke. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could see the war playing out behind Dominic's eyes. Then the elevator dinged and the spell broke. "Tomorrow," Dominic said again, but this time it sounded less like an escape and more like a promise. "Tomorrow, Elena, I give you my word." As the elevator doors closed behind him, Elena sank back into her chair, her knees suddenly unsteady. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the intensity in his voice when he had said her name. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Bianca. "Whatever's happening, don't give up. The good ones are worth fighting for." Eleanor smiled, typing back quickly. "What if he's worth waiting for instead? Then you wait." "But Eleanor, make sure he knows you're not waiting forever." Eleanor stared at her phone screen long after the message disappeared. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the Manhattan skyline stretching endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities and promises, and people brave enough to reach for what they wanted. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find out which category she and Dominic fell into. But as the afternoon wore on and the office grew quiet around her, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow might change everything, for better or worse. The question was, would Dominic show up ready to tear down his walls, or would he arrive with new ones already in place? Elena arrived at the office 15 minutes early, her hands trembling as she inserted her keycard. She had barely slept, replaying Dominic's promise over and over. "Tomorrow, Elena, I give you my word." But promises, she had learned, were fragile things, easily broken by fear, by pride, by the cold light of morning that had a way of making midnight confessions seem like temporary madness. The office was eerily quiet at 7:45 a.m., the kind of silence that amplified every sound, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant rumble of traffic 42 floors below, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Eleanor moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, starting the coffee machine, checking emails, organizing the day's schedule. But her eyes kept drifting to Dominic's office door, dark and closed like a question mark she wasn't sure she wanted answered. At exactly 8:30 a.m. the elevator chimed. Eleanor's breath caught as Dominic stepped into the reception area, and she immediately knew that something fundamental had shifted. Gone was the carefully pressed armor of his usual business attire. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a simple black sweater that hugged his broad shoulders, his hair slightly mussed as if he had been running his hands through it. He looked younger somehow, more human, more accessible, more dangerous. "Good morning, Elena." His voice was softer than usual, lacking its typical commanding edge. "Good morning." She stood slowly, noting the way his grey eyes searched her face, as if trying to read her thoughts. "Your first meeting isn't until 10. I know." Dominic moved closer to her desk, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with something new, uncertainty maybe, vulnerability. "I came early because we have something to finish." Elena's pulse quickened. "Do we?" Instead of answering, Dominic gestured toward his office. "Walk with me?" It wasn't really a question, but Elena appreciated that he had phrased it as one. She followed him across the marble floor, acutely aware of the space between them, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, far enough that they weren't quite touching. Dominic closed the office door behind them with deliberate care, the soft click somehow more intimate than any kiss Eleanor had ever received. When he turned to face her, she saw that his legendary self-control was hanging by a thread. "I spent all night thinking about what you said," he began, moving to stand behind his desk, as if the polished surface could provide some barrier against what was happening between them. "About knowing me, the real me." Elena remained standing near the door, giving him space to speak, to process, to decide. "I've built my entire life around being untouchable," Dominic continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Around never needing anyone, never depending on anyone, never letting anyone close enough to—" He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "Close enough to what?" Elena prompted gently. "Close enough to leave." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession in a cathedral, sacred and raw and impossibly honest. Elena felt her heart crack open at the pain she heard beneath his words. "Dominic," she said softly, taking a step closer to his desk. "Who left?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everyone who ever mattered. My father when I was 8. My mother, emotionally after that. Friends who decided I was too intense, too driven, too much work. Women who wanted the money and the status, but not the man who came with it." Eleanor took another step closer. "I'm not them. Aren't you?" Dominic's eyes met hers across the desk, and Elena saw decades of hurt reflected there. "Elena, you're 26 years old. You're brilliant and beautiful, and you have your whole life ahead of you. What happens when you wake up one day and realize you've tied yourself to a man who doesn't know how to love anyone without trying to control them? Is that what you think you'd do to me?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Control me? I think I'd try to keep you so close that I'd suffocate you. I think I'd be so terrified of losing you that I'd end up driving you away. I think you're giving yourself far too little credit," Elena interrupted, moving around the desk until she was standing directly in front of him. And me far too little credit, too. Dominic's breath caught as she reached up to touch his face, her palm warm against his jaw. You want to know what I see when I look at you, she whispered. I see a man who worked 3 jobs to put his sister through medical school. I see someone who visits a lonely old woman every Sunday because she reminds him of his grandmother. I see a man who leaves his office door open when I work late because he wants me to feel safe. Eleanor's thumb traced along his cheekbone, feeling the subtle tremor that ran through him at her touch. I see a man who has spent 10 years building walls to protect his heart, and I'm standing here asking him to let me in, not to tear them down, to let me in. Elena. Dominic breathed her name like a prayer, his hands coming up to cover hers where they rested against his face. What you told me about saving yourself, I meant every word. Why? The question was barely audible. Why me? Elena smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Because you're worth saving myself for. Because in 2 years of working beside you, I've seen your heart even when you thought it was hidden. Because when you look at me, really look at me, I feel like I'm home. For a moment they stood frozen in that space between confession and consequence. Her hands on his face, his hands covering hers, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them like gravity. Then Dominic closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, and Elena knew that whatever walls he had built around his heart, she had finally found the key. Time stopped existing in that office. Elena felt the exact moment when Dominic's last wall crumbled. It was in the way his breath shuddered against her palm, in the way his fingers tightened over hers, as if she were the only thing anchoring him to earth. When he opened his eyes again, Elena saw something she had never seen before. Dominic Hale, completely unguarded. I don't know how to do this, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know how to let someone matter this much without destroying it. You don't have to know, Elena replied softly, her thumb tracing the strong line of his jaw. We can figure it out together. Dominic's hands slid from hers to her waist, pulling her closer, until there was barely an inch of space between them. Elena could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes that she had never noticed before. Eleanor, he said her name like a confession, like a question, like the answer to something he had been searching for his entire life. I need you to understand something. She nodded, not trusting her voice. If we do this, if I let you in completely, I won't be able to let you go, ever. That's not a romantic declaration. It's a warning. I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and it terrifies me. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held his gaze steadily. What exactly are you asking me? I'm asking if you're sure, really sure, because once I kiss you, once I show you how much you mean to me, there's no going back to the way things were. I'll want all of you, your mornings and your midnights, your bad days and your good ones, your fears and your dreams and everything in between. The intensity in his voice made Elena's knees weak, but she didn't look away. And what are you offering in return? Dominic's hands moved up to cup her face, mirroring her earlier gesture. Everything I am, everything I have, everything I never thought I was capable of giving anyone. Eleanor felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Dominic, I'm in love with you, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back another second. I've been in love with you since the day you straightened my tie and told me that my 2 p.m. appointment with Meridian Corp was running late, and I realized that you were the first person in 10 years who wasn't afraid to touch me without permission. Elena's breath caught. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Dominic whispered. The way you take your tea with honey when you're stressed, the way you unconsciously braid your hair when you're concentrating, the way you smile at the security guard downstairs every morning because you know his daughter is sick and he needs someone to be kind to him. His thumbs brushed away tears Elena didn't realize had started falling. I remember the day you wore that blue dress, the one with the small buttons, and I had to leave the office for 2 hours because I couldn't concentrate on anything but how beautiful you looked. I remember every time you've stayed late to help me with a difficult deal, every time you've anticipated what I needed before I even knew I needed it, every time you've made this cold, sterile office feel like something resembling home. Dominic, Elena whispered, overwhelmed by the raw honesty in his voice. I'm not good at this, he continued, his forehead resting against hers. I'm not good at feelings or vulnerability or any of the things that matter in a real relationship. But I'm good at protecting what's mine, and I'm good at keeping promises, and if you'll have me, if you'll trust me with what you've saved, I promise I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of it. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a benediction. When she opened them again, Dominic was watching her with an expression so tender it took her breath away. "You want to know something?" she said softly. "What?" "You already are worthy of it. You have been from the very beginning." And then, finally, Dominic kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, consuming kiss Elena had imagined in her secret fantasies. It was reverent, careful, like he was handling something precious that might break if he wasn't gentle enough. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and when he pulled back, Elena felt like she had been remade. "Elena," he breathed against her lips. "I know," she whispered back, understanding everything he couldn't say. They stood there in the soft morning light, filtering through the office windows, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, and Elena realized that this quiet, profound moment was better than any grand romantic gesture could have been. A soft knock on the office door made them spring apart. "Mr. Hale," Cassidy's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock appointment with Brightwell Industries just arrived. Should I show them in?" Dominic looked at Elena, and she saw a flash of something almost like panic in his eyes, the fear that the outside world would intrude on what they had just discovered. Elena smiled and reached up to straighten his sweater, the gesture intimate and natural. "We have the rest of our lives to figure this out," she said quietly. "But right now, you have a business to run." Dominic caught her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "Have dinner with me tonight? Are you asking as my boss or as the man who just told me he loves me?" "I'm asking as the man who spent 2 years falling for his assistant and finally found the courage to do something about it." Eleanor's smile was radiant. "Then yes, absolutely yes." As she moved toward the door to let in his appointment, Eleanor felt Dominic's eyes on her, and she knew that everything, absolutely everything, had changed. Elena changed her dress 3 times before settling on the emerald green one that made her skin glow. Standing in front of her small apartment mirror in Queens, she tried to calm the butterflies performing acrobatics in her stomach. This wasn't just dinner. This was the beginning of something that could either be the most beautiful chapter of her life or the most devastating. Her phone buzzed with a text. "I'm downstairs. Take your time." Elena smiled, recognizing Dominic's consideration even in a simple message. She grabbed her purse and coat, pausing at the door to take one last, steadying breath. The October evening air was crisp as she stepped outside her modest apartment building. A sleek black car waited at the curb, and Elena's heart skipped when she saw Dominic leaning against it, hands in his pockets, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He wore dark slacks and a navy blue button-down, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. Without the armor of his business suits, he looked younger, more approachable, more like the man who had kissed her with such reverence that morning. "Eleanor." He straightened as she approached, and she caught the way his eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look different outside the office?" she finished with a smile. "Breathtaking," he corrected softly, moving to open the car door for her. "You look absolutely breathtaking." As they drove through the city, Elena was struck by how natural this felt, sitting beside Dominic in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Manhattan blur past the windows. There was none of the awkwardness she had expected, none of the uncertainty about crossing the line from professional to personal. "Where are we going?" she asked as they pulled up to a small, intimate restaurant in Greenwich Village that Elena had never heard of. "Somewhere we won't be interrupted by business calls or quarterly reports," Dominic replied, coming around to help her out of the car. "Somewhere I can focus entirely on you." The restaurant, Lucetta's, was warm and dimly lit, with exposed brick walls and small tables adorned with flickering candles. The hostess, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, greeted Dominic by name. "Mr. Hale, your usual table is ready," she said with a genuine smile. "And this must be Elena." Elena blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" The woman, her name tag read Francesca, winked. "This one's been talking about you for months, always Elena this and Elena that. I was beginning to think you were imaginary." Elena looked at Dominic, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "You come here often?" "It's my escape," he admitted, as Francesca led them to a corner table. "When the office gets too loud, when deals get too complicated, I come here to think. Francesca makes the best risotto in the city, and she doesn't ask questions about why a grown man needs a place to hide." As they settled into their seats, Eleanor studied the man across from her, really studied him. Without the polished veneer of his office persona, she could see the traces of the boy who had worked 3 jobs to put his sister through school, the man who visited lonely old women on Sundays. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Eleanor said after they had ordered wine. Dominic considered this, swirling the burgundy liquid in his glass. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was younger." "Really? History, specifically?" "I loved the idea of helping people understand how the past shaped the present, how patterns repeat themselves across generations." He took a sip of wine. "But teachers don't make enough money to support younger sisters with medical school dreams." Elena felt her heart constrict. "Do you ever regret it?" "No," Dominic said without hesitation. "Building this company, becoming successful, it gave Lydia opportunities she never would have had otherwise. She's a pediatric surgeon now, saving children's lives every day. That's worth more than any personal satisfaction I might have found in a classroom." "Lydia," Elena repeated softly. "You've never mentioned her name before." "I don't talk about her at work. Too personal." Dominic's expression grew tender. "She's the reason I know I'm capable of loving someone unconditionally. She's proof that I won't always destroy what I care about." Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Tell me about her." For the next hour, over plates of perfectly prepared pasta and risotto that lived up to Francesca's reputation, Dominic told Elena stories about his sister, how she used to make him elaborate birthday cards out of construction paper and glitter, how she called him Dom Dom until she was 16 and he threatened to cut off her allowance, how she cried when he gave her the keys to her first car, a modest Honda that she treasured like it was a Ferrari. "She's going to love you," Dominic said suddenly, mid-story about Lydia's disastrous attempts at cooking Thanksgiving dinner during her residency. Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You want me to meet her?" "I want you to meet everyone who matters to me," Dominic replied, his voice serious. "Elena, I meant what I said this morning. I'm not interested in casual dating or seeing where this goes. I know exactly where I want this to go." "And where is that?" Dominic leaned forward, his grey eyes intense in the candlelight. "Everywhere. I want to wake up with you on Sunday mornings and argue with you about what to watch on Netflix. I want to hold your hand at office Christmas parties and not care who sees. I want to meet your family and have you charm mine. I want to build something real with you, something that lasts." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "Dominic, I know it's too soon to be talking about this," he continued quickly. "I know we should probably take things slow, get to know each other outside of work." "No," Eleanor interrupted softly. Dominic's face fell. No, it's not too soon," Eleanor clarified, smiling through her tears. "Because I've been thinking the same thing. I've been imagining Sunday mornings and Christmas parties and meeting Lydia since the day I realized I was in love with you." "When was that?" Dominic asked quietly. Elena thought back, remembering the exact moment. 6 months ago. You were on a conference call with investors from Tokyo, and it was running late. I brought you coffee, and you looked up at me with this grateful smile and whispered thank you, like I had just saved your life instead of bringing you caffeine. And I realized that I would do anything, to see you look at me like that for the rest of my life." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the flickering candlelight. "Elena Parker," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "you are going to ruin me in the most beautiful way possible." As they walked back to the car later, Elena's hand tucked securely in the crook of Dominic's arm, she felt like she was floating. The city moved around them, taxis honking, people laughing, the eternal rhythm of New York at night, but all of it felt distant, unimportant. What mattered was this: Dominic's thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, the way he held doors and pulled out chairs without thinking about it, the way he listened to her stories about growing up in North Carolina with the same attention he gave million-dollar deals. What mattered was the way he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. "Elena," Dominic said as they reached her apartment building. "Yes?" He turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Thank you." "For what?" "For waiting," he whispered, "for seeing something in me worth waiting for giving me the chance to fall in love with the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." And when he kissed her goodnight on the steps of her building, Eleanor knew that this was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Eleanor discovered that being in love with Dominic Hale was both easier and harder than she had imagined. Easier because their dynamic at work had shifted into something beautiful. Stolen glances across conference rooms, his hand brushing hers when he passed documents, the way he said her name like a secret only they shared. Harder because maintaining professional boundaries while wanting to kiss him senseless during board meetings required more self-control than Elena knew she possessed. They had been careful, discreet. But Elena suspected that Cassidy knew something had changed. The receptionist had started giving them both knowing looks and had taken to humming love songs whenever Dominic emerged from his office with what she called his Elena smile. On this particular Wednesday morning, Elena was reviewing contract amendments when her phone rang. Elena Parker, Mr. Hale's office. Is this the woman who's stolen my brother's heart? Elena nearly dropped her coffee. The voice on the other end was warm, confident, with just a hint of Dominic's inflection. I'm sorry, who is this? Lydia Hale. And before you panic, Dom doesn't know I'm calling. I may have stolen his assistant's direct number from his phone when he wasn't looking. Elena felt her cheeks warm. Dr. Hale, Lydia, please, and I have a proposition for you. Elena glanced toward Dominic's office, where she could see him on a conference call, gesturing emphatically at his computer screen. What kind of proposition? Dinner this Friday, my apartment. I want to meet the woman who managed to crack my brother's legendary emotional fortress. Eleanor smiled, despite her nerves. He talks about me. Eleanor, he practically glows when he says your name. It's actually a little nauseating, Lydia said with obvious affection, but also wonderful. I haven't seen him this happy since, well, ever, actually. I don't know, Elena said hesitantly. Shouldn't he be the one to arrange? Trust me, if I left it up to Dom, he'd spend 6 months planning the perfect introduction. He's overthinking this because you matter to him, so I'm taking matters into my own hands. Eleanor looked toward Dominic's office again, her heart softening at the sight of him. Even in the middle of what appeared to be a heated negotiation, he looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Okay, she said finally. Friday works. Excellent. I'll text you the address. And Elena, don't let him talk you out of this. My brother needs someone who's willing to push him out of his comfort zone. After Lydia hung up, Elena stared at her phone, wondering what she had just agreed to. Meeting Dominic's sister felt like a significant step, the kind that moved them from "we're figuring this out" to "this is serious." Everything all right? Elena looked up to find Dominic standing beside her desk, his conference call apparently finished. The concern in his grey eyes made her heart flutter. That was your sister, Eleanor said, deciding honesty was the best policy. Dominic's expression shifted from concern to something closer to panic. Lydia called you. What did she want? To invite me to dinner on Friday. Oh, God. Dominic ran a hand through his hair. Elena, I'm sorry. I mentioned you a few times, and she's been pestering me about meeting you. I told her to wait until... I said yes. Dominic stopped mid-sentence. You did? Elena stood, moving closer to him. In the past 3 weeks, she had learned to read his expressions like a favorite book, and right now he looked terrified. Why does that scare you? She asked gently. Because Lydia has no filter, Dominic said, his voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. She's going to tell you embarrassing stories about me and ask you invasive questions about your intentions and probably show you my awkward teenage photos. Elena laughed, reaching up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become natural, intimate. Dominic, she's your sister, not a federal interrogator. You don't know Lydia. But I want to, Elena said simply. I want to know all the people who shaped you into the man I fell in love with. Dominic's expression softened. You're not nervous. Terrified, Elena admitted, but the good kind of terrified, the kind that means something matters. Before Dominic could respond, the elevator chimed and a man in an expensive suit stepped into the reception area. Elena recognized him immediately. Garrett Thornfield, CEO of Thornfield Industries and one of Dominic's biggest competitors. Hail, Thornfield called out, his voice carrying across the office. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Eleanor felt Dominic tense beside her, his entire demeanor shifting back into business mode. But there was something else, something cold and guarded that hadn't been there moments before. Thornfield, Dominic replied evenly. You don't have an appointment. No, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Thornfield's gaze moved to Eleanor, and she caught something calculating in his expression. It's about the Morrison account. Eleanor saw Dominic's jaw clench. The Morrison account was their biggest client, a deal worth $40 million that had taken months to secure. My office, Dominic said curtly. As the two men disappeared behind the mahogany doors, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Garrett Thornfield's unexpected visit was about to complicate their carefully constructed world. 20 minutes later, the office door opened and Thornfield emerged, wearing the satisfied smile of a man who had just played a winning card. Pleasure seeing you again, Miss Parker, he said as he passed her desk, and something in his tone made Eleanor's skin crawl. After Thornfield left, Elena waited for Dominic to call her in or come out to explain what had happened, but his office remained silent. The door closed like a barrier between them. Finally, unable to stand the suspense, Elena knocked softly. "Come in." She found Dominic standing at his window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city below. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "What did he want?" Elena asked quietly. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he turned to face her, Elena saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. The same guarded expression he had worn 3 weeks ago, before they had torn down his walls. "To remind me that mixing business with personal life is always a mistake," Dominic said, his voice carefully neutral. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. "What does that mean?" "It means that Garrett Thornfield knows about us, Elena, and he's threatening to use that information to destroy everything I've built." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. How could he know? "Because I've been careless," Dominic said, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "Because I've been so focused on you that I haven't been paying attention to who might be watching." Elena took a step closer to his desk. "Dominic, whatever he said, he has photos, Elena, of us at dinner, of me kissing you goodnight outside your apartment. He's threatening to leak them to business journals with implications about my professional judgment, about whether I can be trusted to maintain appropriate boundaries." Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. That's not illegal. People are allowed to date." "Not when one is the other's boss," Dominic said quietly. "Not when it could be construed as a power imbalance or sexual harassment. Not when it gives my competitors ammunition to question every deal, every decision, every success I've had since you started working here." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. "What are you saying?" Elena whispered, though she was afraid she already knew. Dominic closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Elena saw the walls rebuilding themselves in real time. "I'm saying that maybe Thornfield is right," he said, each word carefully measured. "Maybe mixing business with personal life is a mistake I can't afford to make." Elena felt like she was drowning in plain sight. The words, "mixing business with personal life is a mistake," echoed in her mind as she stared at Dominic across his desk. In the span of 5 minutes, he had transformed from the man who kissed her goodnight with reverence into the cold, calculating CEO who treated emotions like liabilities. "So that's it?" Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "One threat from a competitor, and you're ready to throw away everything we've built?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect us both." "No," Elena said, standing straighter. "You're trying to protect yourself, just like you always do when things get complicated." "Elena, you don't understand the position this puts us in." "I understand perfectly." Elena moved closer to his desk, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I understand that Garrett Thornfield is trying to manipulate you, and it's working. I understand that you'd rather sacrifice what we have than fight for it." Dominic's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the pain beneath. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Elena's voice carried a strength that surprised them both. "You have a choice, Dominic. You can let fear make your decisions, or you can trust that what we have is worth defending." "And if defending it costs me everything else? My company, my reputation, the livelihood of every person who works here?" Elena studied his face, seeing the genuine torment there. "Is that really what you think would happen? Or is that just what Thornfield wants you to think?" Before Dominic could answer, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly and felt her heart sink further. "Elena, Dom just called and cancelled Friday dinner. He sounded awful." "What's going on?" "Lydia." "You called Lydia," Elena said quietly, showing him the message. Dominic had the grace to look ashamed. "I thought it was best." "Stop." Elena held up her hand. "Just stop. You're making decisions about our relationship, about my life without even consulting me. That's not protection, Dominic, that's control." The accusation hit its mark. Dominic's face went pale. "That's not what I'm doing." "Isn't it?" Elena's voice remained calm, but tears were starting to build behind her eyes. "You're so afraid of losing control that you're willing to destroy the best thing that's ever happened to either of us." Elena turned and walked toward the door, needing distance before she said something she couldn't take back. "Where are you going?" Dominic's voice cracked slightly. "To think," Elena replied without turning around. "Something you should try doing with your heart instead of just your head." Elena spent her lunch break walking through Central Park, her mind racing. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under her feet as she tried to process what had just happened. 3 weeks of the most beautiful relationship of her life, and one conversation had nearly destroyed it all. Her phone rang. "Bianca, you sound terrible," her friend said without preamble. What happened? Elena found herself spilling everything. Thornfield's threats, Dominic's retreat, the sickening feeling that she was about to lose the man she loved to his own fears. "So, what are you going to do?" Bianca asked when Elena finished. "I don't know. Part of me wants to fight for him, for us. But another part of me is tired of being the only one willing to take risks." "Elena, can I tell you something?" "Of course. In college, you wrote a paper on the civil rights movement. I remember you talking about how the people who changed history weren't the ones who played it safe. They were the ones who decided that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were against them." Elena stopped walking. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe this isn't about Dominic choosing between you and his company. Maybe it's about both of you choosing between fear and love." After hanging up, Elena made a decision that would have terrified her 3 weeks ago but now felt inevitable. She was going to fight. Elena returned to the office with a plan. She spent the afternoon researching everything she could find about Garrett Thornfield and his business practices. What she discovered made her blood boil: a pattern of using personal information to manipulate competitors, several pending lawsuits alleging corporate espionage, and a reputation for ruthless tactics that bordered on illegal. At 5:30 p.m., most of the office had cleared out. Elena knocked on Dominic's door. "Come in." She found him exactly where she had left him hours earlier, staring out the window with the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, closing the door behind her. Dominic turned and Eleanor's heart clenched at the exhaustion in his eyes. "Eleanor, if you're here to continue our earlier conversation, I'm here to tell you that I love you," Eleanor interrupted. "And I'm here to tell you that I'm not going anywhere." Dominic's composure cracked. "You should. Eleanor, you should run as far away from this mess as possible. Why? Because loving you is inconvenient. Because it's complicated. Because someone like Thornfield thinks he can use our feelings against us." Elena moved closer, and this time Dominic didn't retreat. "Do you want to know what I learned about Garrett Thornfield today?" she continued. "He's facing 3 separate lawsuits for corporate espionage. His own company is hemorrhaging clients because people don't trust him. He's desperate, Dominic, and desperate people make stupid mistakes." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the problem isn't that we fell in love. Maybe the problem is that we're giving a bully exactly what he wants. Us turning on each other instead of standing together." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, even if you're right about Thornfield, the fact remains that dating you puts both of us in a compromised position. Then we change the position." "What?" Elena took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. "I'll transfer to another department, or better yet, I'll take that job offer I got last month from Meridian Corp." Dominic's eyes widened in shock. "You got a job offer?" "Senior accounts manager, 20% pay increase. I turned it down because I wanted to stay here with you. But if us working together is the problem, then we solve that problem." "Elena, you can't sacrifice your career for—" "I'm not sacrificing anything," Elena said firmly. "I'm making a choice. I'm choosing love over fear, us over them, fighting over surrendering." She stepped closer, close enough to see the war raging behind his eyes. "The question is, what are you going to choose?" Dominic stared at her for a long moment, and Elena held her breath, waiting to see if the man she loved was stronger than his fears. "You would really leave Hale and Associates?" he asked quietly. "I would leave anything that stands between us and our happiness," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "But Dominic, I need to know that you're willing to fight for us too. I can't be the only one taking risks." Dominic closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Eleanor saw something she hadn't seen since Thornfield's visit: determination. "What if I told you that maybe there's a third option?" he said slowly. "What kind of third option?" Dominic's mouth curved into the first real smile she had seen from him all day. "What if I told you that I might know a way to turn Thornfield's own tactics against him?" Eleanor felt hope bloom in her chest. "I'd say I'm listening, and I'd say that maybe it's time to stop playing defense and start playing offense." Elena had never seen Dominic's apartment before, but she hadn't expected it to feel so much like him. Understated elegance with touches of warmth that most people would never notice. They had decided to plan their counter-strategy away from the office, away from potential eavesdroppers and prying eyes. Now sitting on his charcoal grey sofa, with legal documents spread across the coffee table and 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. Eleanor felt like they were finally on the same team again. "Tell me about this third option," Eleanor said, tucking her legs under her as she studied the papers Dominic had pulled from his personal files. Dominic leaned forward, his sleeves rolled up, looking more like a brilliant strategist than a defeated businessman. 6 months ago, Thornfield tried to poach 3 of my senior analysts. When that failed, he attempted a hostile takeover bid. Both times I let it slide because I had bigger priorities. And now I realize that Garrett Thornfield has been playing a long game, and I've been too focused on building my own empire to see it." Dominic pulled out a folder marked with Thornfield Industries logo. "But here's what he doesn't know. I've been keeping detailed records of every underhanded move he's made for the past 2 years. Elena opened the folder, her eyebrows rising as she scanned the contents. Corporate espionage, bribery attempts, blackmail. Dominic, this is enough to destroy him. It gets better. Dominic's smile was sharp. Remember that Morrison account he mentioned? The one he's threatening to sabotage? Yes. Morrison himself called me this afternoon. Apparently Thornfield approached him yesterday with an offer to undercut my proposal by 30%. Morrison was curious about why a competitor would be so desperate to steal a client that he'd operate at a loss. Elena felt pieces clicking into place. He's in trouble. More than trouble. I made some calls after you left today. Thornfield Industries is hemorrhaging money. 3 major clients have dropped them in the past month, and word is getting out about his business practices. He's not trying to hurt me for sport. He's trying to survive. Eleanor set down the papers, studying Dominic's face. "So what's the plan?" "We give him exactly what he wants." Eleanor blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" Dominic's grey eyes were bright with something that looked suspiciously like mischief. "Tomorrow morning I'm calling a press conference. I'm going to announce that Hale & Associates is implementing new policies regarding workplace relationships, and that I'll be personally overseeing the transition to ensure full transparency." "Dominic, that sounds like you're giving him ammunition. Let me finish." He moved closer to her on the sofa, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "I'm also going to announce that these policies were recommended by our senior accounts manager, Eleanor Parker, who will be leading our new corporate ethics division." Eleanor's mouth fell open. "What corporate ethics division?" "The one I'm creating specifically for you." Dominic's expression grew serious. "Elena, you were right when you said you'd sacrifice your position here for us. But what if instead of sacrificing we evolved? What if we created a role that not only removes any question of impropriety, but also gives you the career advancement you deserve?" Elena felt her heart racing. "You're offering me a promotion." "I'm offering you a partnership," Dominic corrected. "Senior management, your own team, oversight of all corporate compliance issues. It's a position that would put you on equal footing with any department head in the company." Elena stared at him, overwhelmed. "And Thornfield will realize that his threat has backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying us, he's pushed us to implement policies that make us look progressive and forward-thinking. Meanwhile, I'll quietly make sure that Morrison and our other clients know about his desperate tactics." Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing the elegance of the solution. "You've been planning this since this afternoon?" "I've been planning this since the day I realized I was in love with you," Dominic admitted. "I just needed Thornfield's threat to give me the courage to actually implement it." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "Dominic, there's one more thing." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Eleanor's breath caught. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done weeks ago." Dominic slid off the sofa and onto one knee, his grey eyes never leaving hers. "Elena Parker, I know this is unconventional. I know we haven't been together very long by traditional standards, but I also know that in 26 years, you saved yourself for someone you believed was worth waiting for." Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears already starting to fall. "I don't want to waste another day pretending that you're not the most important thing in my life," Dominic continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I don't want to spend another moment being afraid of what people might think or say or do. I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you gave me." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant diamond ring that caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Marry me, Elena, not because it solves our professional complications, but because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. Because you saw something in me worth loving when I couldn't see it myself. Because you taught me that the only thing worth more than building an empire is building a life with someone who makes you want to be better." Eleanor was crying openly now, her heart so full she could barely breathe. "Dominic, I know it's fast," he said quickly. I know people will say we're crazy, that we should wait, that we barely know each other outside of work. But Elena, I've watched you handle crisis after crisis with grace and intelligence. I've seen you be kind to people who couldn't do anything for you. I've watched you choose courage over comfort every single day for 2 years. I know everything I need to know about who you are, and I love every single part of it. Eleanor slid off the sofa and onto her knees in front of him, framing his face with her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll take the promotion. Yes, I'll stand beside you while we destroy Garrett Thornfield's credibility. Yes, to all of it. Dominic's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like everything else about them. How did you know my ring size? Elena asked through her tears. I may have enlisted Bianca's help, Dominic admitted sheepishly, and Lydia's and possibly Cassidy's. Turns out planning a proposal requires a team. Elena laughed, feeling giddy with joy and relief and love so intense it made her dizzy. They all knew. They all knew I was planning to ask. They didn't know when. Dominic cupped her face in his hands. But Elena, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to marry me to solve our professional problems. I'm asking because losing you today, even for a few hours, made me realize that I never want to live in a world where you're not mine. Elena kissed him then, pouring 2 years of careful professional distance and 3 weeks of newfound love and a lifetime of hope into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both breathless, Elena rested her forehead against his. So, she said softly, when do we take down Thornfield? Dominic's laugh was warm and full of promise. Tomorrow, my love. Tomorrow we change everything. And as they sat together on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by legal documents and bathed in the soft glow of city lights, Elena realized that this moment of perfect understanding and shared purpose was what she had been saving herself for all along. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., but Elena arrived at the office at 7, her engagement ring catching the morning light as she organized the final details of their plan. She wore her navy blue power suit, the one that made her feel invincible, and carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Today, she wasn't just Dominic's assistant. She was his partner, his equal, his soon-to-be wife and the architect of Garrett Thornfield's professional downfall. You ready for this? Dominic asked, appearing beside her desk with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that made her heart skip. I've been ready for this my entire life, Elena replied, accepting the coffee and noting how natural it felt to have him close, to touch his hand briefly as he passed her the cup. The question is, are you ready to watch me destroy a billionaire's reputation in front of the Manhattan business press? Dominic's laugh was warm and proud. Elena Parker, you are absolutely terrifying in the most beautiful way possible. At 9:30 a.m., the conference room was filled with reporters from the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, and every major business publication in the city. Elena had personally called each one, hinting at a major announcement regarding corporate ethics and workplace relationships that would set new industry standards. Garrett Thornfield sat in the front row, his smile sharp and predatory. He clearly thought he was about to witness Dominic's professional suicide. He had no idea what was coming. Dominic took the podium with the commanding presence that had made him a legend in investment banking. Eleanor stood to his left, noting how the camera flashes caught the subtle details they had planned, her promotion materials prominently displayed, her engagement ring visible but not ostentatious, their positioning as equals rather than boss and subordinate. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming, Dominic began. Today, Hale & Associates is proud to announce a groundbreaking initiative in corporate governance and ethical business practices. Eleanor watched Thornfield's expression begin to shift from smug satisfaction to confusion. Effective immediately, we are establishing a corporate ethics division, headed by Senior Director Elena Parker. Dominic gestured to Elena, who stepped forward with the poise of someone born for this moment. Ms. Parker will oversee the implementation of new policies regarding workplace relationships, ensuring complete transparency and eliminating any potential conflicts of interest. These policies, which Ms. Parker developed over the past 6 months, will serve as a model for ethical business practices industry-wide. Elena took the microphone, her voice clear and confident. At Hale & Associates, we believe that great business is built on trust, transparency, and integrity. Our new policies don't just address workplace relationships, they address the broader issue of corporate responsibility, in an industry that has too often prioritized profit over principles. She looked directly at Thornfield as she continued. We've seen too many examples of companies using personal information as weapons, engaging in corporate espionage, and employing blackmail tactics to gain competitive advantage. These practices aren't just unethical, they're business models built on fear rather than excellence. Thornfield's face had gone pale. Which is why, Elena continued, Hale & Associates is also announcing our partnership with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to provide evidence and testimony in ongoing investigations into corporate misconduct within our industry. A murmur rippled through the room. Several reporters leaned forward, sensing a bigger story. Dominic reclaimed the microphone. We have reason to believe that certain individuals have engaged in systematic harassment, blackmail, and corporate espionage. While we cannot comment on ongoing investigations, we can say that Hale & Associates will always choose transparency over secrecy, ethics over expediency. Eleanor watched Thornfield stand abruptly and push toward the exit, but she wasn't finished. There's one more announcement, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. Mr. Hale and I are engaged to be married. The room erupted in camera flashes and excited murmurs. We're sharing this personal news, Dominic continued smoothly, because we believe that love, like business, should be conducted with honesty and integrity. We're proud of our relationship, proud of our professional partnership, and proud to demonstrate that it's possible to maintain the highest ethical standards while building something beautiful together. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched the reporters scribbling frantically, the camera flashes illuminating Dominic's face as he looked at her with pure adoration. After the conference, as reporters filed out and staff began cleaning up, Elena found herself alone with Dominic in his office. So, she said, sinking into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where she had sat every morning for 2 years, never imagining it would lead to this. How do you think that went? I think, Dominic said, moving around the desk to pull her into his arms, that Garrett Thornfield is about to discover what happens when you threaten the wrong couple. Elena laughed, feeling giddy with triumph and love and the sheer impossibility of how perfectly everything had worked out. Your phone's been buzzing non-stop, she noted, nodding toward his desk where his phone was lighting up with calls and messages. Morrison, Dominic said without looking, and 3 other potential clients who apparently enjoyed watching us destroy Thornfield's credibility on live television. And I don't care about any of them right now. Dominic cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes intense with emotion. Eleanor, what you did up there, the way you commanded that room, the way you turned his own tactics against him, that was incredible. We did that, Eleanor corrected. We did that together. Together, Dominic repeated softly, like he was testing the word. I like the sound of that. Eleanor rose on her tiptoes to kiss him, pouring all of her love and pride and hope for their future into the connection between them. When they broke apart, Eleanor rested her forehead against his. So what now? She asked. Now, Dominic said, his voice warm with promise. We plan a wedding. We build a company based on integrity instead of fear. We have dinner with Lydia on Friday like we originally planned. We wake up every morning grateful that we were brave enough to choose love over safety. Elena smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from careful professional distance to devastating honesty to this moment of perfect understanding. Dominic? Yes? I have one more confession. His eyebrows rose. Oh? I never actually saved myself for you specifically, Elena said softly. I saved myself for the possibility of you, for the idea that somewhere out there was someone worth waiting for, someone who would see me completely and love me anyway. Dominic was quiet for a moment, his hands gentle on her face. Eleanor Parker, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. You didn't just save yourself for me. You saved me, period. You saved me from a life of walls and fear and emptiness. You saved me from myself. As the afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their office now, Elena realized with a thrill, she understood that this was what love actually looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but 2 people choosing each other every day, building something beautiful from honesty and trust and the courage to be vulnerable. I love you, Eleanor whispered. I love you too, Dominic replied. And Eleanor, we're just getting started. Outside the windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities and promises, and people brave enough to reach for what they wanted. And inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, held each other close, and began planning the rest of their lives. The end 2 years later. Eleanor stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their new penthouse office, watching the sun set over Manhattan, her wedding ring catching the golden light as she reviewed the quarterly reports for Parker Hale Enterprises. The hyphenated name had been Dominic's idea, a symbol of true partnership that extended far beyond romance into every aspect of their shared empire. What had started as Hale and Associates had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, a company built on the radical idea that success and integrity could coexist. "Mrs. Hale," a voice said behind her, warm with affection and just a hint of the formality that had once defined their entire relationship. Eleanor turned, her heart still skipping a beat at the sight of her husband leaning against the doorframe, his tie loosened after a long day of meetings, his grey eyes soft with the contentment that had replaced the guardedness she remembered from those early days. "Mr. Hale," she replied with a smile, moving toward him, "how did the presentation go?" "Morrison Industries wants to expand their contract by 40%, Dominic said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Apparently, having a corporate ethics division headed by the most brilliant woman in Manhattan is excellent for business." Elena laughed, remembering how terrified they had both been that their love would destroy everything they had worked for. Instead, it had transformed everything they touched. "Speaking of brilliant women," Dominic continued, "Lydia called. She wants to know if we're still planning to visit next weekend." "Of course we are. I promised to help her pick out a wedding dress." Dominic's sister had finally said yes to her longtime boyfriend, a pediatric cardiologist, who was almost as stubborn as she was. The engagement had lasted exactly 3 months before Lydia declared that life was too short to waste time planning elaborate ceremonies when you could be married and happy instead. Eleanor understood the sentiment perfectly. Their own wedding had been small, intimate, just family and close friends in the garden of Dominic's childhood home upstate. Elena had worn her grandmother's pearls and a simple white dress that made her feel like herself, rather than a bride from someone else's dreams. Dominic had cried when she walked down the aisle, and Elena had cried when he promised to love her with the same courage she had shown him. Bianca had been maid of honor, of course, and had spent the entire reception telling anyone who would listen that she had predicted this outcome from the very beginning. Cassidy had caught the bouquet. Francesca from Lucetta's had catered with risotto that made the food critics weep, and Mrs. Caldwell from 4B had given them a blessing that reduced the entire wedding party to tears. It had been perfect in every way that mattered. "There's something else," Dominic said, his voice carrying a note Elena had learned to recognize, the tone he used when he was about to change their lives again. "What kind of something else?" Instead of answering, Dominic pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Eleanor recognized the letterhead immediately. The mayor's office. "They want us to head the new City Ethics Commission," Dominic said quietly. "A joint appointment. You would oversee corporate compliance, I would handle municipal contracts. It would mean stepping back from day-to-day operations here, but Elena, it would mean changing how business is done in this entire city," Elena finished, her eyes bright with excitement. "The pay is terrible," Dominic warned. "The impact would be enormous. We'd be working with politicians and bureaucrats and people who don't understand that ethics aren't optional. We'd be proving that 2 people who fell in love despite every obstacle can transform an entire system." Dominic studied her face, reading the answer there before she spoke it. "Yes," Elena said simply. "Whatever they're asking, whatever it requires, yes." Dominic's smile was radiant. "I love you, Elena Parker Hale." "I love you too, Dominic Hale Parker." They had both taken each other's names, another symbol of equality that had raised eyebrows in some circles and inspired others. Elena didn't care about the eyebrows. She cared about the message, that love was about addition, not subtraction, about becoming more than you were alone, not less. As they stood together in their office, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built, awards for ethical business practices, photographs from their wedding, a framed copy of the article that had dubbed them Manhattan's power couple with a conscience, Elena thought about the woman she had been 2.5 years ago. That woman had been brave enough to save herself for love, but she had been afraid of so many other things. Afraid of taking risks, afraid of demanding what she deserved, afraid of believing she could have everything she wanted. This woman, the one standing in Dominic's arms, wearing his ring, sharing his name and his dreams and his determination to change the world, was afraid of nothing. "Elena," Dominic said softly, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes? Do you remember what you told me that first night when you said you had saved yourself for me?" Eleanor smiled, remembering the terror and hope of that moment. I remember. I've been thinking about that phrase. I saved myself for you. And I realized something. What's that? Dominic cupped her face in his hands, his touch as reverent as it had been the first time he kissed her. You didn't just save yourself for me, he said quietly. You saved us both for each other. You saved me from a life without love, and you saved yourself from a life without purpose, and somehow, together, we saved each other from being anything less than extraordinary. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, the same tears that always came when Dominic showed her the depth of his understanding, the completeness of his love. Dominic Hale Parker, she whispered, you are going to ruin me in the most beautiful way possible for the rest of our lives. Promise? He asked, echoing the question he had asked her on their wedding night. Promise, Elena replied, echoing the answer she had given him then, and would give him every day for the rest of their lives. Outside their windows, Manhattan sparkled with the lights of millions of people chasing their own dreams, making their own choices, finding their own courage. Some would succeed, some would fail, some would discover that the thing they thought they wanted wasn't what they needed at all. But inside, two people who had chosen love over fear, truth over safety, and each other over everything else, held each other close and planned tomorrow's revolution. Because some love stories aren't just about finding the right person. Some love stories are about becoming the right people together. And this one, this story of a woman who saved herself for love and a man who learned that love was worth saving, was just beginning. The end final reflection. Some words have the power to tear down walls that the world could never touch. I saved myself for you wasn't just a confession, it was a silent vow that changed two destinies forever. Because true love isn't measured in time, power, or pride. It reveals itself in the perfect moment, and when it happens, it transforms even the hardest heart into eternal devotion. What would you have done if you were Elena? Would you have had the courage to wait for true love? Do you believe that some people are worth transforming your entire life for? What did this story teach you about the power of choosing love over fear? Your participation in the channel is very important, so please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.